Author of Get Off My Back. Debbie was the Assistant Attorney General in Maryland, very experienced attorney, very familiar with a lot of the injustices of the American system. She's the author of Get Off My Back, Black Lives, White Justice, and a former prosecutor's quest for reform. Debbie, in the first half of our conversation, you noted that your mother was somewhat of an optimist when it came to America, and you suggested that perhaps you differed from her, particularly in terms of the education you've got both formally and informally. Is that true? Are you less optimistic about the essential justice in America than your mom?
I don't think I'm less. I'm optimistic. Well, I don't want to use the word optimistic. I'm hopeful in another way. I'm hopeful because I think that with activism, activists, community organizers, community people, regular people, formerly incarcerated people, alliances of racial justice organizations, that with that pulled together and working together, that we, meaning as Black Americans, as the oppressed people in this country, we have to and can make America be what she is supposed to be. So I'm hopeful in a different sense. I would not use the word optimistic because that's just not a word that I use in this context. I prefer to use the word hopeful. But that hope is based on a lot of people, a lot of organizations, white people, Black people of all races, working together to make America do what she should be about. And those were actually some of the words that my mom would say when things weren't right. She would say, I'm going to make them do that. And it is that determination and that hope and that spirit is what will change America for people willing and able and wanting to make America be what she should be.
On this July 4th, Debbie, we've done many shows on the justice or injustice of the American criminal justice system. Many academics are very critical, believing we should perhaps even abolish the police. But you're an insider. As I said, you were formerly the Assistant Attorney General in Maryland. And yet your book, which is appropriately titled Get Off My Back, Black Lives, White Justice, and a Former Prosecutor's Quest for Reform, has quite a radical implications. Are you suggesting that the American criminal justice system, in your experience, is different from white people and Black people?
Well, I'm not suggesting it. I am stating it affirmatively. And that is not based on my ideas. That is based on many studies that have been done that show that in every single aspect of the criminal justice system, from people who are detained in jail pre-trial, where they're supposed to be presumed innocent, but they're waiting in jail because they couldn't make bail, all the way up to convictions and even to the death penalty, in every single aspect of the US criminal justice system, Black people are racially disproportionately at a higher level and treated far differently than the same white individuals facing the same charges, being represented by the same types of attorneys, meaning private attorneys or public defenders. And that is what the system is based on. So it's not my suggestion. It is suggestion of many studies that have been done, some as high as 200,000 people that have been studied, cases over periods of years, of many years, that have come to that conclusion on certain things just as so simple as marijuana, where studies have all shown that Black people and white people smoke marijuana to the same extent. One is no greater than the other. But in our criminal justice system, Black Americans are arrested and charged in the states where it's not legal for possession of marijuana at a rate of almost 4 times that of white Americans. And it continues like that throughout every single thing in the criminal justice system. So yes, I'm not just making it up. These are studies that have been done over periods of years, some in larger studies throughout the country, not just in any one particular place, anywhere from as far as Wisconsin all the way to New York. So we have to look at the facts because we still believe that facts matter. So these are the facts, and that is the problem in one aspect of the criminal justice system, which not imprisons, but brings 13 million misdemeanor cases a year, every year, which accounts for 80% of the cases that are in the criminal justice system. And the vast percentage of the people that are involved in those cases are Black people.
Your book, your new book, Get Off My Neck, is somewhat of a memoir. You describe your own disillusionment as you begin to experience the system. Tell me more about how that disillusionment manifested itself. And are you still deeply disillusioned by the system?
Oh, I'm even greater disillusioned by the system than what it was when I worked there, because when I worked there, I only knew the system as it was in Baltimore City. Again, I did not know what happened in New York City, what happened in Wisconsin, what happened in Texas, Florida, and all over the country was the same as what has happened in Baltimore until I actually researched it and got deep into it to find that out. But to say that the system works fairly is just certainly not the way the system really works at all. When I started working as a prosecutor in the Baltimore State's Attorney's Office, I actually, naivete is a great thing when you're like in your 20s and early 30s. I actually thought that I could make a difference as a Black woman prosecutor. It seems very strange to me to say that now, but at that point, I actually thought that I could make a difference. I had seen crime in my community, but I also knew that crime affects not just the person that's being charged with the crime, but it also affects the victim of the crime. And so I came with the viewpoint that I wanted to assist and help victims in the crime, not so much as to put Black people in jail, which is something that people in my neighborhood that I grew up in would tell me, you're working a job where you put Black people in jail. So once I got there, literally almost on day one, definitely by first week, I saw what they meant, and I saw how the system, and just in the beginning, initial stages, how the system works. The justice system, which is really a strange word for how it works, in the prosecutor's office, it doesn't work on justice. The American Bar Association says that the prosecutor should seek justice. That is the model, to seek justice. But in my learnings of working in Baltimore City and what I've later found out is the same across the country, the prosecutor's office works on convictions. It does not work on justice. It does not work on compassion. My entire time that I prosecuted, and I was there almost 5 years, I only remember coming into contact with two white defendants. And that should tell everyone something in and of itself about the justice system. So yes, when I started working there, I saw that it was just an assembly line. There was not enough time to keep up with the volume of the cases. There was not enough time to pursue the things that you should have been able to legal research or pursue or do some research on the case. So it was just an assembly line in and out. And we had a saying, not so much me, but the saying was there before me, is sink or swim. And that meant that, look, you either handle it and you can succeed, or you either don't handle it and you will sink. And that is how it was set up. We never looked at anyone could possibly, when I say we, I'm looking at it as the office, as the institution. We never looked at anyone could possibly be not guilty. The reason being is because a prosecutor's office, and I'm talking a state prosecutor's office, they get their money from government. and the how they're justifying getting the amount of money that they need to run their budgets is based on the percentage of conviction. So when I worked there, and even now, a conviction rate by a prosecutor in the high 80s was considered a good conviction rate, and that was regardless of whether or not the person was guilty or not guilty, or guilty or innocent, I should say. So, yeah, there was just a lot of injustices in the office that I saw throughout the entire 5 years. Right now, we talk about wrongful convictions and people that have been wrongfully convicted, and we'll see that in the paper or online a lot. Back then, and even in jurisdictions now, the goal was to get a conviction, the person was, sentenced to imprisonment, and to basically cancel culture, lock them up and throw away the key. And that is what we in this country call justice.
You talked about an assembly line. It seems like it, at least in your presentation of it, an assembly line to send young Black men, particularly to jail. You're in Baltimore, of course. Debbie, most of our viewers and listeners will be familiar with The Wire. Is that an accurate representation of what justice or the lack of justice is like in a place like Baltimore?
So I've already given another interview and I've said this. I'm going to repeat it now. I didn't watch The Wire.
I mean, did you ever
Okay.
see it at all? You never watched one show?
I may have watched one show, but I was not a fan of The Wire. And the reason why I wasn't a fan of The Wire and why I didn't watch The Wire, though it showed, as I'm told, many of the experiences that I had, is for a vast majority of my life, I've lived in the District of Columbia in Washington, D.C. And coming into contact with people in Washington, D.C., which are people from around the country for the most part, because it is the nation's capital and it does draw more so than probably other cities, other than maybe New York, a vast majority of people from all over the country. And people that watch The Wire, they actually think, and even some today, that that is what the entire city of Baltimore is like. And so that is a stereotype in itself that I just did not choose to watch. And that is not taken away from the show and the accolades that it has received and that the actors have received. But in terms of my own personal life, I chose not to watch a show that basically makes people believe that this is what the entire city of Baltimore is like.
Debbie, how much has the Black Lives Matter movement, the protests that have taken place over the last few years, how much has that changed anything?
I think it has put things in the forefront. I mean, I believe you have to have protests, and the protests that were from 2020 as a result of the murder of George Floyd, there were upwards of 26 million people that were documented as marching in the U.S. It was the largest U.S. march in history. And because of that, it brought and put to the forefront the things that are happening to Black people that are not happening to white people or to any other race. And so, in that regard, that was needed and that was necessary. But those 26 million people that went out and marched in a pandemic, risking their lives, and the vast majority of them were white people, as were documented. Those people are still here with us, and we just need to reinvigorate them to create further action, because it's one thing to bring awareness, and that is really what marches do. All marches do that. The civil rights movement was about marches, and it brought awareness to people that lived in the North that things are really happening in the South with Black people that may or may not be happening to the same degree in the northern cities. And it brought about changes, and it brought about the Civil Rights Act and things that were signed that gave voter rights to Black people. So we're at that point, that initial point, I believe now, where there is an awareness, but we just have to keep our foot on the pedal. Just keep applying pressure, doing the things that we need to do by way of activism. We can't just assume that things are going to just go away because we marched.
How surprised were you as an insider by the Floyd case? Of course, again, there are two interpretations of it. One that this was an exceptional event. And there's always a bad apple in the barrel, and this policeman, the murderer, wasn't representative of the police, and others who believe that it was just another day at the office for white policemen. What's your take as a former prosecutor and the Assistant Attorney General of Maryland?
So I'm going to go back a little bit to one of your earlier questions, because one of your earlier questions, you had asked me, what did I learn from, my family about race? And one of the things that people in my community knew about long before George Floyd was that white police officers and police officers kill Black people and they get away with it. And that was just something that was at times reported in the Black newspaper, but it was never within the main white stream newspaper. So the killing of George Floyd was not anything new in terms of knowledge to many African Americans. How he was killed was definitely new in my mind, because people were generally shot and just got away for it. And that's been going on for years. And that has been known within the wider African American community, not necessarily in the white community. But the inhumane way that George Floyd was murdered by Derek Chauvin, I don't think anyone anticipated that was happening. But interesting enough, as an aside, as I wrote in my book, Derek Chauvin did the same thing a few years earlier to a Black woman. She lived and did not die, but he did the same exact thing by pressing his knee on her neck, restraining her in the same way that George Floyd was. So he was more than just one bad apple, because there have been studies that have been conducted by one individual, Professor Philip Steinson, who was former police officer, former attorney, who has kept a database of many of the things that police officers have done and have gotten away with it, as well as the Washington Post has a database of police wrongdoing. So we now know that in addition to that there are white supremacist police officers that are working in many cities throughout this country, that the knowledge and the information is out there, and I detail it in much greater detail in my book. But no, George Floyd was not just one bad apple. It is systemic, the way that is evolving within the police departments in this country.
And of course, Get Off My Neck is a reminder of what the murder Derek Chauvin committed, the George Floyd incident. Some people have concluded from that tragedy and justice, Debbie, that we need to profoundly reform the police, perhaps even get rid of the police. What's your take in terms of some of these calls to get rid of the police entirely?
Well, we need to profoundly reinvent the entire justice system. And that includes the prosecutorial system and what happens there. And of course, that includes the police department. If there weren't the police who are feeding all the many cases, some of which, to be quite honest, are just bogus, or they're low-level misdemeanors that should not even be cases at all. Most of those 13 million misdemeanor cases that clog our court system up on an annual basis, they should not even be in the system. They should not be cases. Many prosecutors during the pandemic declined to prosecute just many misdemeanors just as a result of the pandemic itself. But when we're talking about the police, if we don't have those 13 million misdemeanor cases, or the majority of those 13 million misdemeanor cases, we don't really need that many police officers. Because while the police officers are primarily doing is arresting people for things, and we're talking misdemeanors, we're talking things like disorderly conduct, trespassing, loitering, prostitution, possession of marijuana, driving a vehicle because you failed to get your license renewed. That's a misdemeanor. Driving a vehicle because you failed to get the registration sticker removed one time and you were stopped by the police, that's a misdemeanor. So there are many misdemeanor cases that should not even be on the books, that we should not be prosecuting for. And therefore, if we were not prosecuting them, we would not need all the police officers that are fueling the prosecutors' offices with cases, and then therefore causing many people, in the result of which, to die, either not because of police officers being on their neck, but there are people who actually die in jail while they're waiting for their case, their misdemeanor case, to come to trial. And so when we're looking at it on a more global basis of the numbers that are out there, yes, if we eliminate the numbers, we will not need nearly much police officers.
So the subtitle of your new book, Debbie, Get Off My Back, is Black Lives, White Justice, and a Former Prosecutor's Quest for Reform. You've talked about reforming the police. What else needs to be reformed?
So the whole way we do quote unquote justice in the criminal justice system needs to be reformed, because what we think about is everything has to go through the court system, and everything doesn't have to go through the court system. I argue for restorative justice practices as well as diversionary practices where people, and this is being done in 35 states, it's not being done on any wide scale basis in the US, but it is not anything that is new, where we would look at individual cases as they are, get the agreement of the victim in the case and the defendant to go through a restorative justice process based on what they are needing in their case, so that we are actually providing the tools that a person charged with a crime would need, but we are not saddling that person with a conviction, something that will change where they can live, how they can live, what job they can have, whether they can vote or not, whether they can serve on a jury or not, will change their life just by virtue of their being charged and convicted of a crime. And many people that are charged with the crime, there's 46% of people who are in jails or prisons, they have mental health issues. And saddling them with a conviction is not going to help them. My point is, people in the system need help. Many of them need help. They don't need a prison cell, and they certainly don't need to have the key thrown away and they're just in there rotting away for life. There is definitely a better way that we can run our so-called justice system.
Do we need to simply start again? And in what sense is the criminal justice system responsible for the injustices of the past, not just slavery, but the history of the absence, perhaps, of justice in the criminal system in America?
So I think if I understand your question, you can tell me if I heard it right. Um, the Our system just, it perpetuates and keeps a revolving door occurring, and that perpetuates the numbers that we have. That is why the U.S. has the largest imprisonment system in the world. In the world, we have laws.
Larger than China.
Exactly. We have the largest in the world. I mean, think about that. Of all the countries, we have that basic thing that we incarcerate more people than anyone in the world. There are crimes that we have on the books that no one else has. Most other civilized societies don't have the misdemeanor crimes that I'm talking about. They don't have 13 million cases running in and out of the court system on an annual basis because they don't have those crimes on the books. No one is talking about, we need to slap someone who's committed a murder, but the vast majority of the cases are misdemeanor, low level, non-violent cases. There are other crimes that are on the book that no other society has. They've all been abolished, one of which is what's known as the felony murder rule, which has been abolished in all other countries. It basically says that if there is a murder that is committed while another crime is being committed, then if you are convicted, you can serve life without the possibility of parole. In all other instances, the cash bail system is only available in the Philippines. The cash bail system basically says, although we are a country that says, you're presumed innocent until you're found guilty, well, where there is a cash bail system, you have to pay if you have a bail set before you can be free. And so many people cannot afford their bail. People are living from paycheck to paycheck or from day to day, and they don't have those funds available. And again, the vast majority of people who are in jail pre trial are Black people. There's only been one state, Illinois, who in September of 2023 eliminated the entire cash bail system. And cash bail has been eliminated in the District of Columbia ever since the 1990s. And there's no greater lack of failure of people to return for their trials because they haven't had to pay a bail. So those are two instances that would just clear up a lot of the problems that we have. And instead of having people be housed pre-trial again before they've ever been convicted of anything, in the state of Maryland and elsewhere, but in the state of Maryland, there is a pre-trial detention center that is being built or will be built to the tune of 1 billion with a B, dollars to hold people who are legally not convicted of anything. And so when we're looking at revamping the institution, we need to look at justice reinvestment. And what that term means is no, don't take $1 billion to house people who haven't even been convicted of a crime. Take that same amount of money and put it in these programs that will help people, that will not saddle them with a criminal record, but will help them. I mean, just imagine what $1 billion can do in terms of helping people who are charged in the system of these petty crimes, because everyone, for the most part, has other socioeconomic reasons that need to be dealt with. So when I'm talking about, yes, revamping the entire system, I'm talking first about getting rid of all those misdemeanors, and even with felonies, not all felonies are violent felonies. I mean, looking at other felony cases as well, and finding a way to create justice reinvestment, taking funds from other areas and putting them into helping people. And all of that will better society, because if there are people who can be more able citizens within society, that betters all of us in society, not just Black people. It improves the lives of all people in society, and just doing anything so that America is not the greatest prisoner of all people in the world just would speak volumes.
Well, let's end, Debbie, where we began on July 4th today. You reminded everyone of, at least in your view, its abysmal criminal justice system, the fact it has a larger prison population than China, and that it's deeply racist. Are you celebrating at all today? I mean, is there any reason to celebrate quote unquote Independence Day on July 4th, 2024?
There is reason for us to work. There is much work that needs to be done. And that is what I want to leave on, is that we have a lot of work to do to truly, for everyone to be independent in this country. We are not there yet by any slim chance. And we just have to keep working at it.
Well, the author, Debbie Hines, of Get Off My Back, I'm not sure I would call it a depressing book, but a very honest book, a starkly honest book about the injustices of the American criminal justice system. Happy, healthy July 4th, Debbie, even if it's not particularly happy. And I know you're also a frequent commentator on CNN and other networks about Donald Trump. Fortunately, we haven't talked about him today, but I think as the year progresses, we'll have to get you back on the show to talk about America's politics. Thank you so much, Debbie.
Thank you, Andy.
Happy
Thank you.
holidays, and we'll see
Thank
you
you.
again in the not too distant future.